In this 2D animation tutorial, I'll show you how I rigged and animated a desk lamp in Tahoma2D. The graphic I'm using is from FreePic and is by Iconic Bestiary. The link is in the description. I'll open the EPS file in Photopea. The link is in the description. And delete everything except the lamp and desk. I combine the desk section into one PNG with Ctrl-G. I then separate each of the sections of the lamp onto their own layers. I then export each graphic separately, making sure to use TIFF so I have a transparent background, and naming each graphic appropriately. Now I've already done this to save time, so pause the tutorial until you have your graphics ready. I will now open a new Tahoma2D project, making the size the same as my graphics, in this case 1800 by 1800, at 24 frames per second. I use the geometry tool and drag out a square for my background. And fill it with the color using the fill tool. I then extend my first column out to frame 24 so I can see it over the entire animation. Now here's a tip. If you double click on the column name, you can rename the column. I make sure I'm on frame 1, right click on the column, and add a second column above it. I can also use the Insert key to add a new column. I can now simply drag in my images and place them in order on their own individual columns. I expand the columns out to frame 24 and lock the desk and background columns. Now it's time for rigging. Rigging in Tahoma2D is very different from many other programs. First, I need to select the animation tool and change the option to center. This will allow me to determine the pivot point of the graphic. I select the lower arm and move the pivot point to the lower center part of the arm. And here's another tip. You can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and holding down the scroll wheel allows you to pan. I repeat this process with each of the graphics. Please note, it is a good idea to save frequently to avoid losing any work. In order to start the rigging process, I need to open the schematic panel. Right now, everything is connected to the table. I'll leave the background, desk, and base connected to the table. I'll then connect the lower arm to the base by connecting the blue dot to the red dot. I then connect the central pivot to the lower arm. I connect the upper arm to the base, and then connect the upper pivot to the upper arm. I connect the bolt to the base, and then connect the shade to the bolt. Now when I select the base and move it, everything else should also move except the desk in the background. After I make sure everything is connected correctly, I click on the skeleton tool and a rig is generated. I could use inverse kinematics for this animation by simply changing the mode. In this case though, I'll just use the default animation mode. I'll leave a link to a video explaining the differences between IK and FK in the description. I add a key to each of the columns on frame 1. This will be my starting position. I'll be animating on 2s, meaning that I will actually only animate every 2 frames. This animation will be very simple. The lamp will hear something off screen, react to the sounds, and then leap to another position. I'll use the animate tool to make the actual animation. On frame 3, I rotate the shade up. Notice the key is already inserted on the shade. On frame 5, I rotate the shade up a bit more. On frame 7, I squash everything down in anticipation of the jump. On frame 9, I rotate the shade down. On frame 11, I tilt the base up slightly to show an anticipation of movement. I also rotate the shade slightly for some secondary action. On frame 13, I copy the frame from frame 9 for the shade and paste it on frame 13. I also copy the base key from frame 1 onto frame 13. This resets their positions. On frame 15, I begin the leap of the lamp. On frame 17, I animate the center of the leap. On frame 19, I animate the end of the leap. On frame 21, I animate the initial landing. On frame 23, I animate the initial settling position. And on frame 24, I animate the final settled position. I make sure the playback marker is on frame 24 and play the rough animation. I then continue to refine the animation. To render the animation, go to Render, Output Settings, choose your settings, and click on Render. If you have a request for a tutorial, a question, or a comment, feel free to leave a comment below the video. If you're interested in learning more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.